The memo arrived at every seat of galactic power within the same 6-hour window, transmitted through the cooperative's priority diplomatic relay in a cascade that the relay's automated systems flagged as unprecedented. Not because of the content, which was classified above the level of the automated flagging protocols, but because of the sheer number of simultaneous high-priority recipients. 49 member species. 49 heads of state, supreme councils, collective intelligences, and governing bodies, each receiving an identically worded message stamped with the cooperative's highest authentication seal and the personal authorization code of Director Oren himself. The message was 4 sentences long. It said, "An emergency session of the Galactic Cooperative Council has been called for 800 Standard Time, tomorrow. Attendance is mandatory for all member species representatives. The subject of the session is the human technological disclosure received this morning. Please review the attached technical summary before arrival. This matter requires your full attention." The attached technical summary was 47 pages. Most of the recipients read it twice. Several read it 3 times. The lead scientist of the Marin Collective's Technology Assessment Division, a being named Counselor Vethprime, who had spent 80 years evaluating the technological capabilities of every species in the cooperative, and had the professional serenity of someone who believed that everything, eventually, had an explanation, read it 4 times, then sat in her office for 40 minutes without moving, then called her deputy and said, in a voice that was very carefully controlled, "I need you to check my math." Her deputy checked her math, then her deputy sat down as well. "Counselor," the deputy said after a long moment, "the math is right." "I know," Vethprime said. "I just needed someone else to confirm it." She looked at the summary on her screen, the clean, precise, almost aggressively well-organized technical document that the human delegation had submitted that morning through standard diplomatic channels as though it were a quarterly report, and not the most significant technological disclosure the cooperative had received in 300 years. "Get me a direct line to Director Oren," she said. "Tell him I need 5 minutes before the session tomorrow." "He's already taken 47 calls," her deputy said. "Tell him it's about page 31, she said. "He'll take the call." Director Oren had, in fact, already read page 31. He had read it at 3:40 in the morning, 2 hours after the disclosure arrived, in the specific way that important documents demanded to be read at unreasonable hours, sitting at his desk with the lights at half power, and a cup of cold Velhari tea at his elbow that he had forgotten to drink, going through the pages with the methodical care of someone who understood that the first reading of something this significant would not be the last. He had been director of the cooperative's diplomatic council for 22 years. Before that, he had spent 30 years as a senior diplomat, and before that, 12 years as an analyst, and in all of those years, 54 years of watching civilizations interact with each other, of seeing the full spectrum of what intelligent species were capable of at their best and their worst and every complicated point between. He had read many important documents. This was the most important document he had ever read. That was not hyperbole. He was not given to hyperbole. He was given to precise assessment, and his precise assessment, sitting at his desk at 3:40 with the cold tea and the half-powered lights, was that the document in front of him was going to change every conversation the cooperative had been having for the past 4 years, since humanity's arrival, and was going to do so immediately and permanently, and in ways that he could only partially predict, which was unusual, because Oren was very good at prediction. He called Admiral Mura at 400. She answered on the second chime, which told him she had been awake. She was in her quarters aboard the Enduring Promise, still docked at the central station, and she looked alert in the specific way of someone who had not been sleeping and had not expected to. "Director Oren," she said. "Admiral," he said, "I've read the disclosure." "Yes," she said. "I assumed you had. I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly, because I think the next 24 hours depend significantly on the quality of the communication between us." "I'll answer honestly," she said. "Were you planning to disclose this when you arrived 4 years ago?" She didn't hesitate. "No," she said. "We weren't ready to disclose it 4 years ago. Some of what's in that document didn't exist 4 years ago. Some of it existed but wasn't verified to our own satisfaction. And now it is. Now it is. He looked at the document on his desk. Admiral, he said carefully, the council session tomorrow is going to be, I want to be honest with you, difficult. There are member species who have been cautious about humanity's military capacity since your fleet appeared at our border. This disclosure will intensify that caution significantly. I know, she said. Is that why you're telling me now, to prepare me? I'm telling you now, he said, because I want to understand your reasoning before I walk into that room. I can defend a position I understand. I cannot defend a position I'm encountering for the first time in front of 49 representatives. She was quiet for a moment. Oren, she said, first name, which she had used twice before in 4 years of working together, both times when the conversation had moved past the formal into something that required the register of honest peers. We disclosed because we said we would. When we joined the cooperative, we made a commitment to transparency with the Council on matters of significant technological development. This qualifies. It does, he said. We could have found a quieter way to handle it, she said. A more gradual disclosure, a slower reveal. We chose not to because a slower reveal would have been a form of concealment, and we decided 4 years ago that concealment wasn't who we wanted to be in this community. She paused. I know what the room is going to look like tomorrow. I've been expecting it, but the alternative was worse. What was the alternative? The alternative, she said, was becoming the thing some of them are afraid we already are. He sat with that for a moment. Outside his office viewport, the station's exterior lighting cast long shadows across the docking arms, and the enduring promise sat in its berth like a small city, every light aboard burning against the dark. Get some rest, he said finally. Tomorrow is going to be long. I don't sleep much before hard days, she said. Neither do I, he said. He ended the call and looked at the document again, at page 31, at the specific section that Veth Prime was going to call about, and that every technical advisor to every council member had already flagged, and that was going to be, tomorrow morning, the center of a conversation unlike any the cooperative had hosted in a very long time. He read it one more time. Then he closed the document, finished his cold tea, and began preparing for the session. The Grand Council chamber at 800 Standard Time held a quality of attention that Oren had not experienced in 22 years at the head of this table. 49 member species, present in person or by holographic link, and not one of them was performing the particular variety of diplomatic patience that long council sessions sometimes required. The courteous attentiveness of beings who were waiting for their turn to speak. Every one of them was genuinely, completely, alertly present in the way that people were present when the information in front of them had not yet been fully processed, and they needed to process it before they could decide what they thought. The human delegation sat at the table's secondary position, the place designated for member species under active discussion, rather than the standard member seat. Admiral Mura was there, with Akafar on her right and her senior technical advisor, Dr. Selin Marsh, on her left. Marsh was the one who had written most of the disclosure document, and she had the specific quality of stillness of a scientist who understood exactly what was in the document and had spent 3 days preparing to explain it to people who were going to have strong feelings about it. Oren opened the session. He stated the facts plainly, as he always did. This session has been called to address the human technological disclosure received yesterday morning, he said. The disclosure covers 3 primary areas. I am going to ask Dr. Marsh of the human delegation to summarize each area, and then we will open for council discussion. I ask all representatives to hold their responses until the full summary has been given. He nodded to Marsh. She stood. She was a human woman of middle years, with the compact, precise manner of a scientist who had spent her career dealing with things that did not care about her expectations, and had learned to lead with accuracy rather than comfort. Thank you, Director Oren, she said. I'll keep the summary as clear as possible and answer questions after. She pulled up the first section of the disclosure on the chamber's central display. The first area concerns propulsion, she said. The current standard for faster-than-light travel in the cooperative is the resonance drive, which generates a navigable FTL bubble with an effective maximum velocity of approximately 12 light-years per day for vessels under 2 million metric tons. She paused. We have developed a propulsion system we call the Cascade Drive. For vessels of equivalent mass, the Cascade Drive achieves a sustained velocity of approximately 94 light-years per day. The chamber was very quiet. At maximum output, which is not sustainable for long periods but is achievable in tactical situations, the figure is 230 light-years per day. No one spoke. The number sat in the room like a physical object. 94. Sustained. 230. Maximum. The resonance drive, which had been the cooperative's propulsion standard for 400 years, and which its best engineers considered a mature, optimized technology, moved ships at 12. The second area, Marsh continued, because the summary needed to be complete before the discussion, concerns defensive systems. Current cooperative shield technology operates on the resonance barrier principle, a projected energy field that absorbs and disperses incoming weapons fire. The effective limit of current cooperative shielding against the heaviest weapons currently in the cooperative's arsenal is approximately 47 seconds of sustained fire from a full battery before shield collapse. She pulled up the second section. We have developed what we call adaptive lattice shielding. The system does not operate on a fixed absorption principle. Instead, it learns in real time during combat the frequency and energy signature of incoming weapons fire and realigns its absorption matrix to match. Against standard cooperative weapons, our projections suggest ALS can sustain indefinitely. Against weapons we have not yet encountered, the adaptation window is approximately 0.3 seconds per new weapon type. The silence had changed. It had moved from the silence of people absorbing data to the silence of people trying to determine whether they had understood the data correctly, indefinitely, against standard cooperative weapons. The third area, Marsh said, pulling up the final section, is the one that most of you have questions about. I know because it's page 31, and we flagged it ourselves in the document as requiring particular attention. She looked around the chamber. We have developed a weapon system we are calling the resonance inverter. Current cooperative weapons, including our own prior generation of weapons, operate by delivering energy to a target in order to cause damage. The resonance inverter operates on a different principle. Rather than delivering energy, it generates a localized field that inverts the resonance frequency of matter within its range. She paused. At low power settings, this causes structural fatigue in target materials. At medium settings, it causes cascading molecular separation. Effectively, the target disintegrates. At maximum power, the effect propagates. Another pause. The propagation range at maximum power for a single emitter array of the type currently installed on our Sovereign-class vessels is approximately 1 light second. The silence was now absolute, not the silence of processing. The silence of a room in which 50 intelligent beings had all, simultaneously, understood something and needed a moment to sit with having understood it. 1 light second. The range of the cooperative's most powerful weapon, the Devastator-class array, installed on only 6 vessels, requiring a dedicated power plant and a crew of 40 to operate, was 11,000 kilometers. The speed of light traveled 300,000 kilometers per second. 1 light second was 300,000 kilometers. I want to be completely clear about something, Marsh said, in the same measured, precise voice she had used throughout, because clarity matters here more than anything else. These systems exist. They are real. They are currently installed on a portion of our fleet. The reason we are disclosing them to the Council today is that we committed to transparency on significant technological developments, and these qualify. We are not disclosing them as a threat. We are disclosing them because you have the right to know what we have, and because we believe that a community built on concealment is not a community worth building. She sat down. Oren looked around the chamber. Then he said, "The floor is open." What followed was the longest council session Oren had ever chaired. It ran for 11 hours with 2 breaks, and it was, he would write in his formal record of the event, the most consequential single day in the cooperative's history since the founding session 1,000 years ago. The first hour was the hardest. Representative Fal of the Sorin Collective, who was the most senior voice in the chamber and whose composure under pressure was legendary, spoke first, and she spoke with the directness of someone who had decided that the moment required honesty above politics. "I want to name what is in this room," she said. "Every representative here is experiencing some degree of fear. I am experiencing it myself. The capabilities described in this disclosure are so far beyond our current equivalents that every strategic calculation the cooperative has made since humanity joined us, every assessment of relative strength, every security guarantee, every mutual defense framework, requires revision." She looked at the human delegation. "Admiral Mura, I want to ask you something directly, and I need a direct answer." "Ask," Mura said. "Is the fleet currently positioned at our border, the 412 vessels that arrived with you 4 years ago, equipped with these systems?" Mura held Fal's gaze. "The Cascade Drive, yes, all fleet vessels." She paused. "The adaptive lattice shielding on approximately 60% of the fleet." Another pause. "The resonance inverter on the 11 Sovereign-class vessels at the fleet's center." Fal was quiet. "So when you arrived," she said slowly, "the 11 large vessels at the center of your formation, which our tactical analysis identified as command and protection assets, those were carrying weapons with a range of 1 light second." "Yes, and we had no awareness of this." "No," Mura said, "you didn't." "That is," Fal said very carefully, "a significant asymmetry of information." "It was," Mura said. "It no longer is." The distinction landed in the chamber with the weight that Mura had clearly intended it to carry. "It no longer is, because they had chosen to disclose, because they had put it in a 47-page document and sent it through standard diplomatic channels as though it were a quarterly report. Because, as Marsh had said, they believed a community built on concealment was not a community worth building. It did not make the fear go away. Orin had not expected it to. But it changed the character of the fear, and that mattered. Representative Gal of the Draki, an excitable species under normal circumstances, and considerably more so under these, raised 6 hands simultaneously and said, at a volume somewhat above the chamber's standard, "How? How is this possible? The resonance drive has been optimized for 400 years. Our best engineers have told us for 2 centuries that the theoretical limit of the technology has been reached. How has a species that has been in space for 200 years developed propulsion that is 8 times faster than our theoretical limit?" Dr. Marsh answered. She answered with the thoroughness and precision of someone who understood that this question deserved a real answer and not a diplomatic deflection. She explained, in terms calibrated to be accessible to non-specialists, the theoretical insight that had led to the Cascade Drive, a reformulation of the underlying physics of FTL travel that the human research team had developed 40 years ago and spent 30 years refining into a functional propulsion system. She explained the specific mathematical framework. She showed the derivation on the chamber's display. And she said something that Orin would think about for a long time afterward. "We weren't starting from where your engineers started," she said. "We were starting fresh. We knew the resonance drive existed, we'd observed it for a long time, but we didn't know the specific engineering path your civilization took to develop it, so we didn't inherit your assumptions. We worked from first principles." She looked at Representative Gal. "Sometimes the person who arrives second gets to skip the detours the first person had to take. We didn't know what was impossible, because we didn't learn it from the people who decided it was." The chamber was quiet. Orin watched the representatives absorb this, the specific, humbling idea that 200 years of fresh eyes might see past the limits that 1,000 years of accumulated knowledge had constructed. "That," said Counselor Vethprime of the Marin Collective, who had been listening with the intensity of someone processing data at high speed since the session began, "is simultaneously the most encouraging and the most alarming thing I have heard in 80 years of professional life." "Why alarming?" Marsh asked. "Because," Vethprime said, "if your team could look at a 400-year-old optimized technology and find an 8-fold improvement by starting from first principles, What else are we missing? What other limits have we accepted that are not limits at all, but simply the edges of the path we happen to take? The silence that followed was the specific silence of 49 civilizations, simultaneously entertaining a thought that was large enough to reorganize their self-understanding. That, Mura said quietly from her seat, is exactly the conversation we were hoping to have. The sixth hour of the session was the one that mattered most. The session had moved by then, through fear and through technical discussion, and through the specific complicated middle ground of representatives who were trying to reconcile genuine alarm with the fact that the species causing the alarm had voluntarily disclosed the cause of it. Representative Tharvan of the Geth, cold, analytical, 300 years old, a being for whom everything was eventually reducible to calculation, had been quiet for most of the session. When he spoke, in the sixth hour, the chamber's attention shifted to him with the specific quality that his contributions always commanded. "I want to reframe the question," he said, in the precise, unhurried manner of a being who had never in his 300 years said anything he hadn't thought through completely. The chamber has been discussing what this disclosure means in terms of relative military capability. I want to suggest that this is the wrong frame. He looked at the human delegation. Admiral Mura, the resonance inverter, at maximum power, 1 light-second propagation range. What is the effect on biological matter within the propagation field? Mura looked at him steadily. At maximum power within the propagation field, biological matter undergoes the same molecular separation as structural matter. Meaning anything alive within the field does not survive. Tharvan nodded. He had known the answer. The document said it clearly. He had asked aloud because he wanted the chamber to hear it stated plainly and directly. 1 sovereign-class vessel, he said, at maximum power could neutralize biological life within a sphere of 1 light-second radius. Yes, Mura said. There are 11 sovereign-class vessels in the fleet at your border. Yes, and however many more in whatever remains of your fleet beyond our sensor range. A pause. Yes. So, Tharvan said, the capability you have disclosed today is, at its theoretical maximum employment, a weapon capable of eliminating life on a planetary scale. The chamber was completely silent. At maximum power, yes, Mura said. Her voice was even. That is an accurate statement. You disclosed this, Tharvan said, voluntarily, through standard diplomatic channels in a 47-page document. Yes. Why? He asked it as a genuine question, not rhetorical, not a trap, not a political move. A 300-year-old analytical mind asking the question that was, stripped of everything else, the only question that actually mattered. Mura was quiet for a moment, not because she didn't have an answer, because she was choosing with care the one that was most true. Because we could not ask you to trust us, she said, while hiding the thing you most needed to know. She looked at Tharvan, and then around the chamber at 49 species who had been part of this community for 1,000 years and who had, 4 years ago, voted to let humanity join. We have this capability, she said. We have had portions of it for decades. We are not disclosing it because we had to. Nothing in our membership agreement required this level of transparency on military systems. We are disclosing it because this community deserves to know what one of its members is capable of. She paused. We are also disclosing it because we want your help. The chamber shifted. Help, Tharvan repeated. Yes, she said. The resonance inverter exists because we were trying to solve a different problem, a defensive problem, a way to neutralize incoming projectiles at range. The weapon capability emerged from the defensive research. We did not design a planet killer. We designed a defense system and discovered when we tested it that at maximum power it was something we had not intended. She looked at Marsh. Marsh stood again. We have spent the last 4 years running comprehensive safety analyses on the resonance inverter, she said. The capability is real. The physics are not in question. What is in question, what we do not yet have adequate answers to, is containment. Whether a propagation field at maximum power can be reliably bounded to its intended range. Whether there are scenarios in which the propagation effect could exceed the predicted radius. She looked at the chamber. We are very good at building things, she said. We are not always as good in the early stages at fully understanding what we have built. We are asking the cooperative scientific community, specifically the Marin Collective's Technology Assessment Division and the Soren Academy of Applied Physics, to work with us on the containment question. Because we do not want to be the species that built something it couldn't fully control and found out about the limits of that control in the worst possible way. The silence that followed this was different from every silence that had come before in the session. It was the silence of a room that had just received information in a sequence, the disclosure, the fear, the capability, the honesty, the ask, and was revising its understanding of the whole in light of the last piece. You have a weapon you do not fully understand, Val said slowly. Yes, Marsh said. And you are asking us to help you understand it safely. Yes. Rather than continuing to develop it independently. We've been developing it independently for 4 years, Marsh said. We've reached the limits of what we can determine on our own. We need different minds, different approaches. The same principle that let us look at the resonance drive and find an improvement, fresh eyes, different assumptions applies here in the opposite direction. We need someone to look at our work and find what we missed. Val looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Oren. Then she looked around the chamber at 49 representatives who had come in this morning afraid and who were sitting now in the specific complicated space of beings trying to hold fear and respect and alarm and something approaching gratitude simultaneously, because none of those feelings were wrong and they were all present at once. Director Oren, she said, I would like to propose a motion. The motion was for the establishment of a Joint Technological Safety Commission, a permanent body comprising representatives from the cooperative scientific community across 12 member species, working in direct partnership with the human research team, with full access to the resonance inverter research, and a mandate to conduct independent safety assessment and containment research. The motion passed 46-2, with 1 abstention. It was the fastest vote on a significant motion Oren had ever seen in the council chamber. Afterward, in the corridor outside the chamber, Veth Prime of the Marin Collective fell into step beside Mura as the delegations dispersed. She was a small being by Marin standards, ancient and precise, with the bearing of 80 years of important work. She said, Admiral, the Fresh Eyes principle, the idea that starting without our assumptions allowed your team to find what we had been unable to find. Yes. I have been thinking about it for 11 hours, Veth Prime said, and I want to tell you something from one scientist to another outside the formal record. Please, Mura said. In 80 years, Veth Prime said, I have evaluated the technological disclosures of 11 species who joined the cooperative. Every one of them arrived with impressive technologies. Every one of them contributed something new to our collective understanding. She paused. None of them arrived with things that should not exist. She said it without drama, simply as a statement of precise fact. Things that our best models said were not achievable, things that would require us to revise not just our engineering but our fundamental physics. She looked at Mura. Your disclosure today will require us to revise our fundamental physics in 3 separate areas. I want you to understand what that means. These are frameworks we have operated within for 400 years. The resonance drive physics, the shielding absorption models, the propagation limits of field effect weapons. She paused. We were wrong about all 3. You weren't wrong, Mura said. The models were accurate within the framework you were using. The framework was the constraint. Yes, Veth Prime said, and you stepped outside the framework. We didn't know we weren't allowed to, Mura said. Veth Prime looked at her with 80 years of careful, precise, accumulated knowledge and the specific expression of a being who had just heard something that was going to reorganize the way she thought about the rest of her career. No, she said. I suppose you didn't. She paused. Admiral, the Joint Commission. I would like to lead it if the Council approves. I would be honored, Mura said. Good, Veth Prime said. Then, with the contained intensity of someone whose professional life had just been handed an entirely new set of problems, and who found this, at 80 years old, genuinely energizing. I have 47 questions about the cascade drive derivation. When can we start? The emergency session's formal record, classified at the cooperative's highest level, accessible only to heads of state and senior diplomatic staff, ran to 900 pages by the time all the session transcripts, technical appendices, and follow-up analyses were compiled. Orrin wrote the executive summary himself, which was his practice for sessions of extraordinary significance. He had written 4 such summaries in 22 years. This was the 5th. He wrote it over 2 days, in the quiet of his office with the enduring promise still visible in its berth through the viewport, the great ship patient and still in the dock, while its crew went about the business of being a city in space. He wrote about the disclosure, the 3 areas, the capabilities, the numbers that had put the chamber in silence at 800 and kept it in various qualities of silence for 11 hours. He wrote about the fear, because the record needed the fear. Future readers would need to understand what it had felt like in the room, what the stakes had been, why the session had mattered as much as it did. He wrote about Tharvin's question, why, and Mura's answer, and the particular quality of the silence that followed, and what that silence had meant. And then he wrote the section he had been thinking about since 3:40 the morning before, when he had sat with cold tea and read the document for the first time and understood slowly, over the course of 47 pages, what he was actually reading. He wrote, "The question this session raised, the question that will define the cooperative's relationship with humanity for the foreseeable future, is not whether humanity's capabilities are alarming. They are alarming. Any honest assessment must say so plainly. A species 200 years into space travel does not, by any model the cooperative scientists have operated within, develop propulsion 8 times faster than our theoretical limit, shielding that learns in real time, and a weapons system with a 1 light-second propagation range. These things should not exist by the frameworks we have used for 4 centuries. They exist. The question, then, is not the capabilities. The question is what the capabilities mean when carried by the species that chose to disclose them. In 1,000 years of cooperative history, we have had species join us with technology superior to the current standard. This is not unusual. Technological progress is uneven across civilizations, and every new member has brought capabilities that the existing community lacked. In 1,000 years, we have also had species develop, in the course of their membership, technologies that raise genuine security concerns. This too is not unusual. What is unusual? What is, to my knowledge, without precedent in the cooperative's entire history, is a member species voluntarily disclosing a weapons capability of this magnitude before it was discovered, before it was deployed, before any event forced the disclosure. They disclosed because they said they would. They disclosed because they asked for help. They disclosed because a community built on concealment, in their words, is not a community worth building. I have thought about this since the session ended. I have thought about what it means to build a weapon you do not fully control, and then bring the problem to your community rather than continuing to work on it alone. I have thought about what it costs to put 47 pages of capability in a standard diplomatic transmission, and send it to 49 member species knowing that the room the next morning is going to be afraid. The conclusion I have reached is this. The most significant thing about humanity's technological disclosure is not the technology. It is the disclosure. Any civilization advanced enough can build extraordinary things. The question that defines a civilization's character, the question the cooperative has been asking about humanity since their fleet appeared at our border, is what they do with what they build. Humanity has, in 4 years of membership, given us a consistent answer to that question. They build things that should not exist, and then they tell us about them, and then they ask for help to make sure the things are safe. That is not the behavior of a species that intends to dominate. It is the behavior of a species that has decided, with the specific deliberateness of beings who know exactly what they are capable of and choose anyway to be something more than that, to be a member of this community in the fullest possible sense. I do not know what humanity will build in the next 200 years. Based on the last 200, I expect it will be things we cannot predict and cannot fully explain. I expect it will continue to require the cooperative to revise its models and update its frameworks and sit in rooms together processing things that exceed our prior understanding. I think that is, in the end, what this community has always been for. He finished the summary. He read it through once. Then he sent it to the classification office and stood at his viewport, and looked at the enduring promise in its berth for a long time. The long, dark, impossible ship, resting quietly in a dock that had been expanded overnight to hold it. Somewhere aboard that ship, he knew Admiral Mura was working. She was always working, the same way Akafar was always working, the same way all of them seemed to work, with the specific sustained energy of a species that had been waiting 200 years for this, and had not yet finished what the waiting was for. He thought about what Mura had said to him at 400, in the quiet of his office with the cold tea. The alternative was becoming the thing some of them are afraid we already are. He thought about Tharvan's question and Mura's answer, because we could not ask you to trust us while hiding the thing you most needed to know. He thought about Veth Prime, 80 years old and energized, already redesigning her professional priorities around 47 questions about a propulsion system that should not exist. He thought about 1,000 years of this community, built one conversation at a time, one difficult session at a time, one disclosure at a time, by species that had chosen, with all the difficulty and complication that choice entailed, to be part of something larger than themselves. Then he thought about page 31, about a weapon's effect that propagated at 1 light second, about the fact that the species capable of it had put it in a standard diplomatic transmission and called it a disclosure and asked for help to make sure it was safe. He turned from the viewport and went back to his desk. There was more work. There was always more work. The cooperative had been built on that truth, one careful conversation at a time, for 1,000 years. He picked up the next document in the stack. Outside his viewport, the enduring promise rested in its berth, patient and still, its lights burning steady against the dark.